Um, Let me go to the other thing that I wanted to talk about. I'll get to Boston tomorrow. I think I'm going to have to do an entire video just on Boston and GE coming and the reallocation of resources, essentially, that it's being used to bring GE here, and the shift of the tax burden not being on a multinational corporation, but now being on the local people in the immediate area. So I just said all that, and I guess I could have told the whole story, but I'm not. I want to move on to to the Panama Papers and the connection to Hillary Clinton. But more importantly, I think if we read the media today and we read Hillary's surrogates today, I think they are signaling that they fully expect Hillary Clinton to have some type of meaningful connection to the Panama Papers. The reason I say that is because right now the Daily Caller, which I don't really count as a credible source, that's why I didn't share that link. The Daily Caller is tying the Podesta Group and some of Hillary Clinton's lobbyists, fundraisers, to a Russian bank, and they're trying to say Hillary Clinton is connected through that. So it's kind of a second cousin twice removed, 6 degrees of separation kind of thing. I think that there's going to be a deeper connection than that third generation connection to the shell corporations that this bank, this law firm set up in Panama. The reason I say that is if you read the headline from Vox, and the headline from Ezra Klein's personal account, if you read the comments across just social media at large, progressives are now starting to make the justification for having a shell corporation and for having tax avoidance versus tax evasion. And someone even pointed out that Barack Obama today used the terminology tax avoidance versus tax evasion, because tax evasion is illegal, but tax avoidance is not. And the most disturbing thing about this is that for how long have Democrats attacked the big bad boogeyman of the Republican Party, particularly the most recent one, Mitt Romney, for his financial exploits? Let's just call it that, right? How long have we used this shell corporations and Swiss bank accounts? How long have we used that to mobilize the Democratic side and use it against Republicans? But now that it's coming really close to home, people are starting to find ways of justifying why shell corporations are not all bad. Like literally, that was a headline on Vox. Vox says, I don't want to recall it from memory, but essentially that not all shell corporations are bad, and that not everything that happened in the Panama Papers was illegal. And Noah dealt with that beautifully in the last in the 8 o'clock hour. But you have the underlying this is the full abandonment of things that we have been preaching, for lack of a better word, for a long time in order to justify support for Hillary Clinton. And that, my friends, is the #1 problem I have with this election. It's not Hillary Clinton. It's not the fact that she is who she is, because Hillary Clinton, to me, is very transparent. I understand exactly who Hillary Clinton is. It is the fact that her supporters are so willing to just lay down things that they have been preaching about, that they have been fighting for. At least they gave us the impression that they were fighting for, all in exchange for just supporting Hillary Clinton. And the question I have is, do any values matter anymore? Is no sooner than this afternoon than I asked the question, you know, if Hillary Clinton showed up in the Panama Papers, how many of you will start justifying shell corporations from a progressive point of view? No sooner than I tweeted that, Ezra Klein comes in my timeline saying, well, not all shell corporations are bad. Really, Ezra? Really? And then you have, well, anyway, I'm not even going to call the other people's names out, but that's the thing that's bothering me, and I want to get you guys opinion on it, Noah and Nick, and then the phone lines are open, 857-600-0518. What's going on here? I have an idea. I'm pretty sure I know exactly what's going on, but what do you guys think is going on here?
Well, Just to come in on the conversation on that, I believe that these Panama Papers just basically confirms what we've already been seeing for a long, long time, where the wealthy and the elite are a large clique across the globe. Like
Yep.
they all link together and they're all doing similar things. And you're right. For the most part in America, we have the wealth that's from oil money or extractive industries on the Republican side, and
Mhm.
then we have the wealth of finance and high tech on the Democratic side. But there's certain things that they share in common. And like you said, tax avoidance and evasion, to me, even though they are two different terms, one is illegal, one is legal, I'm still saying the bottom line is effectively there's a great harm done to society when you allow these things to continue. So I'm not going to make a big difference. I'm not going to differentiate between the two in terms of what's harmful to our society. So I'm going to treat them both the same.
Right, right, but they use that they want to play they want to be nuanced when it's something that's favorable or potentially detrimental to them, and say tax avoidance versus tax evasion. This isn't illegal, and now they're shifting completely away from the moral responsibility that we have to each other through the social contract, that we are going to do our share, we're going to do our part to create a greater society. They shift from that and they laid that down so quickly in order to say, well, this is something that's legal and it would just be in our best interest economically to do it, right? They so how quickly we get away from things, a populist message that the Democratic Party has been benefiting on or from over the last 50 years easily. They sacrifice it on the altar of neoliberalism, in my opinion. I just want to read this headline from Ezra Klein on Vox, and then I want to throw it back to you, Nick. But this was a headline on Vox, and then just that quick, my screen cleared out. Yep, it's not going to work for me this time, guys. Go ahead, Nick, while I find this headline.
Okay, what I was going to say is, you see, in that argument there, they're going to try to say that this is beneficial to our economy, but
Mm-hmm.
there have been people who have been doing studies on this for a very long time, and tax evasion, tax avoidance, on the whole, has cost not just the American economy, has cost the world economy, as a whole, hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's very, very expensive. And when we lose that tax revenue, that money has to come from somewhere. Either
Exactly.
you're going to get it from taxing your population more than you should, or you're going to cut back the services that we as a society have already said we want to have in order to accommodate wealthy people not paying their taxes.
And I think that's what they don't realize, or no, they don't care. I think this is what their supporters either don't realize or don't care. But most definitely, that this is what their uninformed followers don't realize, is that the same game. Okay, let's bring in Boston. Let's bring in Boston because this is the perfect example, right? Boston, the city of Boston just gave $25 million of credit in terms of tax properties, right? Tax property taxes. Brain is working in reverse tonight. Right. So now instead of GE coming in and paying their fair share of property taxes, they've given $25 million in waivers where they don't have to pay this share of property taxes. What this does, though, it robs the community of funds that would have been poured right back into the community, whether it be through whatever school is closed that may have benefited from the property taxes. It pulls away from the coffers of the city. They now have a shortfall that they cannot do other things that they would have done with these dollars, and it shifts the tax burden not onto just the city, but it pushes it on the people. And now that shortfall has to be made up somewhere. And even if you say, for instance, it's going to come from the jobs that they're going to create, do you realize you just shifted the tax burden from the multinational corporation onto labor, onto the people who are going to be making their money? And now you're saying, instead of us taking this tax dollar from the multinational corporation, let's take it from the worker.
Yeah, and even more so than that. Remember, we used to have broad arguments about, do tax cuts hurt the economy, do they help the economy, and
Yeah.
things of this nature. So the problem with the argument is you can't adequately figure out if a tax cut is beneficial to the economy or if it's hurtful to the economy in a vacuum, right?
Right.
So you can say, okay, well, taxes have now lowered the amount of disposable income individuals have, so it's hurt the economy. But on the other side of the equation, if those tax dollars are spent,
Mm-hmm.
back into the community, it's not necessarily like you're just throwing the money into a black hole.
Right.
If we look at the state, the local, and the municipalities, that's 43% of our economy. That's always going to be there. It's stable for the most part until you get in somebody, cutting everything. But for the most part, that's 43% of our economy is government spending. So when you give a tax cut and individuals get to keep their money,
Yeah.
are they really going to make up for the spending that now has to be cut from the government?
No, they won't. They absolutely won't. We saw that with the financial crisis, right? We saw that with even though the bailout had already fully been implemented, you still had a tax. What was the word we were using? A credit. We had a lockdown on credit. I can't think of the exact phrase, but no one could get access to credit. That's because money was not circulating. There was people who have millions and billions of dollars in wealth. They are not going out and spending that money to stimulate the economy. So to answer your question is no. When you cut taxes and you give this money back to, let's just use top 1% right now, but it's not really the top 1%. You give it back. That is money that's been taken out of the economy. The argument has always been tax dollars take money out of the economy. But in the most recent recession, we see that it's not just tax dollars that come out of the economy that slow down the economy, but really it's people who just lock that money up. They save that money, but if they're not investing that money, that's money that's pulled out of the economy. And the excuse always was, Nick, that, okay, we have our taxes, we get a tax break, we have more money that we can spend. Even if we don't spend it, we'll invest it and we'll get a return on our dollars. But we saw with the credit crunch, that's the phrase I was looking for, with the credit crunch, they weren't even loaning out the money. And so you had almost $2 trillion that was locked up because no one was loaning money out, and that was an economic barrier to growth. So that's one side. I want to go to the other side of the equation because you gave a great example of what happens when you give the tax breaks, but and whether or not people spend it. The other side of the equation is whether or not tax breaks actually stimulate growth in the first place. And when you say that we take it, can we examine it outside of a bubble or in a vacuum? The fact of the matter is, no, we can't examine this outside or inside of a vacuum. And you have to be able to ask yourself, would this economic growth, and I'm talking specifically about two periods. The first one is Ronald Reagan, 1981, Roth-Kemp tax cuts. Would that economic growth that everyone lays and credits the tax breaks, would that growth had still existed? If you look in terms of a boom and bust cycle, it's very likely that that growth would have happened anyway. If you look at the previous growth periods, that type of growth would have happened anyway. And so now we're just giving tax breaks away and saying that, oh, this is something that we're going to credit this current boom that we're in. Let's go back. Let's go to the 90s, right? This tech boom that we're in. Let's credit it to the fiscal policies of Bill Clinton, but you can't really credit it there unless you're going to separate the effects of the economic policies of the president versus the business cycle that is cyclical and comes and goes. Nobody is really doing that analysis, but what they want you to conclude is that the tax breaks caused the boom. And
let me add something on Clinton.
Go ahead.
I don't know if you are aware of Joseph Stiglitz, but he was actually on Clinton's economic team at that point, and he basically said Clinton got lucky. You know, when he cut the deficit and gave those tax cuts and it just turned out to be okay, he was like, it was one of those rare instances where you make the wrong decision, but it just so happened to luck out in your favor anyway. And, Ronald Reagan's Morning in America, it actually came after we had a huge savings and loans crisis and the oil and gas crisis, right after that. And it didn't even, it was really like, I don't know how you say this, pent up production that, was going unused, and then you get like a ram of production trying to catch back up.
Yeah.
It's like, capacity that's just catching back up that was always there, but during the time we weren't using it, and then there was a backlog, and so it had to be filled. That's what really that was. It wasn't necessarily like he caused the boom. It was really just us catching up from the busts from before.
Right, and is the business cycle, right? There is a natural boom and bust of ebb and flow in our business cycle in the global economy, specifically in the American economy, and a lot of people are crediting these tax policies to crediting the booms to the tax policies, when in actuality, it at very best, it's a combination, but at worst, it's realistically, it's like it is, like you said, Joseph Stiglitz, they just got lucky and they made bad decisions right around the time of an economic boom. Now, tying this back to the conversation about these neoliberals, because that's we got on this talking about people like Ezra Klein, and I'm just bringing him up because I could not believe for the life of me this tweet that this man put out. Not just a tweet, but an article that Vox put out, and the headline reads like this: "The Panama Papers reveals lots of shady stuff, but some shell corporations aren't so bad." And so now they are starting to mount a defense of shell corporations and tax avoidance, because I believe that Hillary Clinton, in some very significant and intimate fashion, is going to be connected to something in the Panama Papers. That's number one, because these arguments I've never heard come from in such a public and consistent way from the left, or people who claim to be on the left. But number two, the reason we went into that entire economic brief discourse was because even if it's legal, tax avoidance robs the community and the nation, and it shifts the tax burden from the wealthiest and from multinational corporations to workers, to labor, and to that local community that's robbed of programs, that's robbed of funding, that's robbed of school funding, all sorts of things. And we sit back and say, well, we brought and generated jobs. Two things. Those jobs normally don't go to that local community. 9.9 times out of 10, those jobs are not going to benefit that local community. And then two, even if it did, it shifts the burden from a multinational corporation onto the backs of labor and that local community. So for Democrats, for so-called progressives to be touting the benefits of shell corporations and saying, well, it's not technically illegal, and saying it's not illegal at all, and this is tax avoidance, and this is something that's a standard, you have just robbed yourself of, one, any moral sense of morality, but two, of your own argument against Republicans. And this is what this election has been all about, is that just to oppose a progressive agenda being forwarded by Bernie Sanders, they're willing to gut their own arguments. And now I wonder, Nick, did they ever believe this stuff in the first place?
Negative. No, they never believed this stuff in the first place. When they move to the center, they try to undercut Republicans. Let's take Rhode Island for an example. In Rhode Island, it is a deep blue state. And guess what happens in Rhode Island? There are Republicans in Rhode Island that are to the left of a lot of Democrats in Rhode Island.
Wow.
And so this kind of shattered my belief that Democrats on the whole were more to the left than Republicans. No. If in a situation where Democrats have total control, they will run that state just like Republicans run it. They are not just the left. They aren't the antecedent to Republicans. They really are just a more inclusive, a more socially accepting version of republicanism. And this is the argument that I've been making for a very, very long time. You see it with Clinton, you see it in Rhode Island, and we'll see it. And many Democrats will tell you, this country's gone bad over the last 35 or 36 years, but it's mostly been Republicans' fault. And what I will tell them is negative. Democrats have had control, and all these Republican things, the war in Iraq, Democrats voted for that.
Yeah.
Maybe not the majority. The crime bill, Democrats voted for it. Maybe not the majority. Actually, I'm sorry, on that one, I think the majority did. However, my point is there are a lot of bad things that have happened, and Democrats have been right on board. So don't believe that just because they have a D in front of their name necessarily means that they're for the good and they're not a neoliberal, because there are many neoliberal Democrats.
Listen, let me tell you something. That Mississippi bill, HS 1523, I guarantee you that you had, as a matter of fact, I don't even have to guess. I can look it up, but I guarantee you had a lot of Democrats vote for that. So even on social issues, right, you have that crossing over back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, and you cannot look at a candidate and say just because they have a D by their name, they have our best interests. And the way they've gotten away with this for a long time, Nick, I'm not going to lie. Like, I have studied at great lengths the move to the right, but I always studied it through the lens of Republican propaganda. And I always viewed Democrats as being weak and allowing this left-leaning media being weak and not doing its part to push back against the rightward push of the right-wing conservatives. You know, that was my thesis, if I had a thesis. This, I would say the last 2 years has been a transformative moment for me to take a step back and look at the DLC and look at the intentional steps that Democrats have taken over the last 35 years to move us towards more right-leaning economic policies, such that it is very hard to distinguish a Democrat from a Republican in terms of economic policies, particularly around issues like globalization, TPP, NAFTA, and all the things that they expose us to, the global forces that they expose labor to, and the extent that they're willing to sacrifice progressive values and sacrifice labor in exchange for neoliberal economic policies. Go ahead.
The biggest trick I think that they do, though, is they make it seem like globalization is a natural occurrence. Like, you can't, you know, this is just what happens. There's nothing you can do about it. We just have to give in, and you have to adjust. And if you don't adjust, you'll fall to the wayside, and that's your fault for not adjusting. When, if you look at the countries that still are first world countries and still have strong manufacturing bases, that's because they didn't allow globalization to take away their manufacturing. If you look at Germany, they're paying, you know, people that work in the auto industry, they're paying them on average $45 and $50 an hour. They're getting universal health care. They're getting, you know, I think it's like 4 to 6 weeks vacation every year, and that company is still hugely profitable. And they still have a manufacturing base. Their jobs aren't going to China. They're not going to Korea. They actually import people in and try to keep them there to bring their wages down. That's what they're doing when they let in 1 million Syrian refugees. They want to actually bring wages down by just the sheer number of people coming into the population. But my point is, getting back to America, they have a trade surplus with America, and some of that has to do with the fact that American goods and products only have 50% market penetration over there. In the United States, they have a lot more market penetration, and there's not really any kind of balancing factor to accommodate between the differential in currency or standard of living.
Nick, I think what's going to be great for our channel, when you start doing your videos here over at the Benjamin Dixon Show channel, and you should get a nice whiteboard behind you and all the charts and graphs so that people can follow along, because I could follow along with you. I would say 9 times out of 10, and I would just say that last little bit, I actually needed to see a chart for that one. So I want you to break out the chart and do some videos, because I think it's a robust conversation that no one else is going to have, and the ability that we have to tie it back to real politics, right? These are political decisions. This is not inevitable. This is a very strategic and intentional push that includes political decisions, as well as media, as well as propaganda, as well as all things identity politics. Here's the kicker. A lot of what's being accomplished is being accomplished on the backs of identity politics. Like, if you separated social issues, identity politics, from the Democratic Party, put that aside, what differentiation could you really make, statistically significant differentiation between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party on economic issues alone, right? We are still living underneath Ronald Reagan's paradigm. So if you take away identity politics, what do you really have in the Democratic Party? What do you think?
I mean, I would argue that looking at it just from the numbers wise, like you would just like I said, you just have a more socially inclusive Republican, basically. Like they still give out tax cuts, they still glorify business, they glorify the business culture, they glorify CEOs and success, they glorify educational attainment and elitism in forms of elite schools and private schools, even charter schools.
Yep.
They still kind of glorify that thing. They glorify, aspects of the mind over people that work with their hands, and those are all social choices that they've made. Those are all, and then when it comes down to policy, globalization, it's a
And
political choice that they've
right,
made,
right, right. And
and
but
then
they
they push.
cast it as inevitability, right? This is the newest. This is the not newest. This is circa 1990s, right? It's just this is inevitable. You need to retool, right? Remember the entire movement that they were telling people in their 50s, you need to retool. You got to go back to school and learn a new trade because and learn computer science because your industry has left and it's not coming back. And if you didn't do it successfully, then well, it's really your fault, right? It's your fault because you couldn't keep up with the changing times. When all along these are, like you said, political decisions being made by opposite sides of the same coin.
Yeah, like going back to Europe, if you look at Europe, now I'm not saying Europe doesn't have its problems because in many aspects they start to mimic the United States in the way that they can, in any way that they can. But if you look at Europe, they're not being exposed to the same level of globalization that the United States has let its population be exposed to. And that's mostly a political choice. In the United States, we don't have very strong unions. We don't have a socialist party. We don't have a multi-party system that can rally against these things, and we really don't have a political party that's going to counteract the right's narrative.